Okay, so in this part we are basically going to carry on with what we were doing last time, which was creating this fetch users function. So now we've performed this query, we need to process the results and put them into an array. So the array we're going to be creating is the users array. We're just going to define that here as an empty array, like so. And then we need to loop over the query results, doing something for each row. And the way we are going to do that is using a while loop. So we can do while row equals MySQL fetch a sock. The result not equal to false something, and that something is going to be users equals row. And what that will do with these two sort of square brackets, will add this to the end of the array. So it'll put it onto the end of the array, basically. So, well, there's no simpler way to say it, that's what it does. And then finally we just need to return the array. Done. Easy. So the reason this works is that, well, I've explained it before, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but when you call MySQL fetch a sock, it will sort of return the current row as an array, sort of associative array, and then it will move the array, move the row pointer on by 1. So every time we call it, we're sort of going down the table, and then once you get to the end, it returns false because there are no more results, and then this loop stops, and we get to this return. So it's not too complicated, really. Anyway, that's that function defined and completed. So we can test this now. If we just go to our user list page, you can see it's currently like it is. So if we just add a print underscore r of fetch users, oops, there we go, and go to our browser and hit reload, you can see we get an array. If I just view the page source to make it slightly clearer, you can see we get an array containing 2 elements. Each of those elements is itself an array, and each of those contains the ID of the user and the username, which is all the information we need for this page. So now, instead of outputting it as an array like that, which is very un-user friendly, we want to loop over it and output some nice HTML type stuff. So we're going to replace this print underscore r with a for each loop. I'm going to do for each fetch users as user, and then into here we're going to do sort of something. It's okay to use a function as the first parameter here. Generally, using a function inside the whatever this bit is called of a loop is not a good idea. So, for example, with a for loop, this condition or the function in this bit here would be called for every cycle of the loop, which would end up being very inefficient. The same is true for a while loop, but for a for each loop it's slightly different. The function is called once, and then that array that it returns is looped over, so it's not actually the function that's called lots of times, it's just that array, sort of. Anyway, so yeah, function as this first parameter is fine. Anyway, so inside here we want some HTML, so we're going to close our PHP block and open a new one, just so we don't have to echo big chunks of HTML. And then the HTML we're outputting is going to be a paragraph tag, which is a bit wrong, but never mind. And then we're going to be having a link inside here, so a anchor link tag href equals something we'll define in a moment. We do need the equals there though. And then we're going to close that and the end the tag. And then in this bit here, we're going to have the username, which is in the variable, in the user variable for this user anyway. So we can just do echo username, like so. So now if we reload our page, you can see we get a list of the 2 users that we have in the table. If I just mouse over them, if you look down here at the bottom of my browser window, you can see that the link is currently just user list. So all these do at the moment is reload the page, which is slightly pointless. So what we need to do excuse me, is have these linked to the profile page. So if you remember, the profile page is this page here. At the moment it's just sort of a template profile, and what this needs to do is take a get parameter, a get variable, and get the information for that user ID, and then display information on that for that user. So this link is going to be profile.php and UID equals something, and that something is going to be the user ID, which again we can get from the user variable by just doing echo user ID, like so. So if we just reload our page, and now nothing appears to have changed, but I will just mouse over them. If you look at the bottom of my browser window again, for this first user we get UID equals 1, and for this second user we have UID equals 2. So if we just click on this, we get directed to the profile page. At the moment currently blank, well, no information. You see we have profile and user ID equals 2. So this get variable can be used to specify which user we want the information for. So this would work as well. It don't have to be linked to. You could, like, people could send this to each other and they go, hey, check out my profile, and then like they could link them to this and it'd show up their profile. So it's like, this is sort of the whole point of PHP really, is for dynamic sites. So anyway, we're going to move on to the profile page now. So what this page needs to do is get information based on the sort of get UID variable, which I'll explain in a moment. But the first thing it needs to do is include the backend, the init file, because that will sort of connect the database, which we need to do obviously. So we're going to include core/init.inc.php, like that. And then, well, I won't have done anything, so there's no point checking it. But what we need to do is we're going to be using a function to get the information from the database. So we're going to define a new variable as user info, and that's going to be equal to fetch user info, and that's the function we'll define in a moment. And we're going to have it take one parameter, which is going to be the get variable, get UID. Obviously at the moment, if we reload this now, we'll just get an error. So if I just reload this, we get call to undefined function. So that's what we need to do next, actually go and define this function. So let's go back to our page and go to our init file, our backend file, sorry, and we're going to define that function here. So let's just define it basically. So function fetch user info, and it takes one parameter, which is the UID, the user's ID, and then we're going to have it do a query and return the information. Just quickly comment what it does, which is fetches profile information for the given user. Hopefully that's all spelled right, not that it's that important. So anyone looking at this file should be able to sort of tell what this function does and sort of see where it's used, what it can be used for, I guess. Anyway, so because this comes from an untrusted source, i.e. the user's URL bar in their browser, we need to make sure that it's actually a number. So we're just going to do UID equals int UID. If you don't know what I'm doing, why I'm doing that, I've got a video on SQL injection, so you should probably go and watch that. Anyway, moving on, because we're using a slightly more complicated query here, we're going to define an SQL variable instead of just doing it in line like this up here. So we'll define SQL, QL equals, no, quotes, there we go, and this SQL is going to be select some things, and these things are going to be the username as username, user first name as first name, user last name as last name, Mr. Comma there. Okay, there we go. First name, last name, email, so user email as email, user about, which is their like about me section, as about, user location as location, user gender as gender. And we'll be selecting all this from the users table, where the user ID is equal to the user ID we supplied, which was the UID variable. So that's that SQL defined. Hopefully I haven't made any syntax errors. Sort of glancing at it, it looks okay, but we'll find out in a moment. And then obviously what we need to do now is actually perform the query. So I'm going to define a new variable called result, and that's going to be equal to MySQL query of SQL. So that's the SQL that we're actually running. So that's pretty simple really, we're just selecting a load of information. It's quite a big query, but it's not too complicated. It's just a lot of information that needs to be selected. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So what we need to do now is actually return the result. So what we're going to be returning is the result of MySQL fetch a sock. Because we're only fetching one row, we can just literally do return. We can just return MySQL fetch a sock of result. So what this should do, if I spell MySQL right, is still wrong. There we go. What this should do is return an array containing all this information. And I'll just test this now by going to our profile page, and just after we've called the function, I will print _r the result. So if we go to our browser and hit reload, you can see we get that information. If I just view the page source to make it a bit clearer, just bring it down here, you can see we get this information. So obviously the username is going to go in this username sort of area, and well, the rest is obvious. I'll explain that probably in the next part, but just for this, there's something else I want to mention. What if they specify a, well, let's just demonstrate first. If I just say 1, you see we get different information. So if you do the page source again, to bring this down here, you can see we get, this is not the same as before. So that's sort of the dynamic element of this page. Whoops, don't want that any bigger. That's the dynamic element of this page, so that's how it's going to work. What happens though if they enter a user that does not exist, like 101? At the moment we've just got nothing. So what have we actually got? What's the result of that function? Well, if we just do var dump, what this will do is output the actual data type in a way that you can sort of understand it. So we get bool false, which is telling us that the function is returning false. So the reason for this is that the MySQL fetch a sock function, like I mentioned before, will return false if there are no rows that it can fetch, i.e., well, I said if it's off the end of the table, but in this case it starts off the end of the table, because the table has 0 rows, and we're trying to fetch row 1. So that's pretty much it. So that kind of works out nicely for us, because we would want to return false if the user doesn't exist, because we can use that to show a message like sorry that user doesn't exist, which is what we're going to do next. So yeah, that's kind of lucky in a way. So what we want to do is obviously not that, so just remove that line. So down here inside this div tag, we're going to create a new PHP block, and inside this we're going to check if user info equals false. We need to output a message saying that user does not exist, and if not, we want to do this profile information stuff down here. So we're going to add an else here and remove this, tab all this across, and then here we need to end the else, so we need to do a new PHP block, and that's basically it. So that will now check if the user exists as well, which is sort of kind of a handy side effect. So if I just view the page, not view the page source, if I just go back to our page now and hit enter, you see we get that user does not exist. If we go to a user that does exist, like Bob, you see we get the empty profile information. So in the next part, we're just going to be filling out this page basically. So we're going to be adding the PHP variables here, and then we'll start on the edit profile page. Okay, so thanks for watching, and join me in part 3 or 4, whichever comes next, where we'll do what I just said. Okay, so thanks for watching, and join me in the next bit. I never know how to end these.